Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. We all know the famous line, a date which will live in infamy. And you know the story, a devastating surprise attack that finally pushed America into World War II. But what if it wasn't a surprise at all? What if the story we've all been told isn't the whole story? The material we're digging into today suggests something radically different. So picture this. It's the White House, the evening of December 6th, the night before the attack. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt gets handed this urgent, decoded message straight from Tokyo. You see, the U.S. Navy had cracked Japan's most secret diplomatic code, the Purple Code, a long time before this. And this message, it was the last piece of a 13-part puzzle, basically saying Japan was officially cutting off all talks with the United States. And there was absolutely no misinterpreting what this meant. After he read it, Roosevelt looked up and said it plainly. This means war. He knew exactly what was about to happen. This was the final confirmation. So think about that. You're the commander-in-chief. You've just learned that a war is about to start, like within hours. What's your next move? What's the immediate, urgent order you give to protect your forces, especially the entire Pacific Fleet, just sitting there, a perfect target at Pearl Harbor? He did nothing, absolutely nothing. That critical warning, that message that screamed war, it never reached the two men who needed it most, Admiral Kimmel and General Short, the commanders on the ground at Pearl Harbor. The stage was set for an absolute disaster. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just quickly recap the official story. You know, the one that was told to the American people, the one that really defined a whole generation. The next morning, at dawn, the attack came. And for the public, it was framed as a complete and total surprise, a shocking, unbelievable bolt from the blue. The human cost was just devastating. 4,575 American servicemen lost their lives. And in the chaos that followed, you know how it goes, someone had to take the fall. The blame landed squarely on the two commanders in Hawaii, Admiral Kimmel and General Short. They were basically crucified in the press, blamed for being unprepared, and forced to retire in total disgrace. But this is where the official story really starts to fall apart. The whole argument from our source material is this. While the guys in Hawaii were definitely surprised, the top brass back in Washington, they were anything but. I mean, the evidence of foreknowledge is pretty extensive. You had the winds code. This was a prearranged Japanese radio signal, east wind, rain, which specifically meant get ready for war with the US. On top of that, Australian intelligence literally spotted the Japanese fleet sailing for Hawaii. And there was even a British double agent who tried to sound the alarm in Washington about Japan's plans. And this timeline just shows you how close to the wire all this was. 3 days before the attack, the Japanese fleet is spotted. We're not talking weeks, we're talking days. Before that, the winds code, the actual signal for war, is broadcast and picked up. And then, of course, the night before, the president himself reads the final message and says, this means war. The warnings were practically screaming. So what happened to that winds code warning? You know, the one that literally meant war was coming? Well, according to our source, top U.S. military officials didn't just ignore it. They flat out denied it ever existed and then actively tried to destroy any records of it. This doesn't really sound like incompetence, does it? It sounds more like an intentional cover-up. Which brings us right to the alleged cover-up. I mean, if Washington knew what was coming, but Hawaii didn't, how did they explain that away? How did they manage to shift the blame so effectively? Well, look at this contrast. On one side, you have Kimmel and Short, their careers and reputations completely destroyed. On the other side, you have General Marshall and Admiral Stark, the two top military men in Washington. And when they were asked under oath where they were on that critical night when the war message came in, their answer was, they couldn't remember. Right. And if that doesn't sound suspicious enough, it gets even darker. According to the historian John Toland, just a few days after the attack, General Marshall got his top officers together and told them, "Gentlemen, this goes to the grave with us." I mean, that is a chilling thing to say. It sounds a lot like a pact of silence. So where were they really? Well, despite their convenient memory loss, a close friend of the Secretary of the Navy later said that both men spent most of that exact night in the White House with President Roosevelt, waiting for the attack on Pearl Harbor to happen. And this, of course, leads us to the biggest and most troubling question of all. Why?
Why on earth would American leaders knowingly let their own Pacific fleet get wiped out and thousands of their own men die? The source we're looking at points to one thing: motive. A motive born out of political necessity. You see, the Roosevelt administration had a huge problem. Roosevelt and his cabinet were totally convinced that America had to get into the war against the Axis powers for the country's own survival. But the American public? They were overwhelmingly against it. They wanted no part of another European war. So the administration was stuck between a rock and a hard place.
So, what could possibly change the minds of an entire nation overnight? What kind of event could unite a deeply divided country and get them to rally for war? Well, a direct, devastating, unprovoked attack on American soil would certainly do the trick.
Rear Admiral Robert Theobald, a man who was actually there at Pearl Harbor, he put the president's dilemma in very chilling, simple terms. He wrote, "While it takes two to make a fight, either one may start it." The thinking goes, if the administration couldn't declare war itself, maybe it could let Japan start one for them.
Historian John Tolland really sums up this terrible moral calculation. He wrote that a small group of highly respected leaders had managed to convince themselves that it was necessary to act dishonorably for the good of their nation. And that really leaves us with the core dilemma here. If this version of events is true, it forces all of us to ask a question that is deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Is there ever a time when it's okay for leaders to deceive their own people, to sacrifice some for the sake of the many? When, if ever, is a dishonorable act justified for the good of a nation?